They trusted her with the future of the monarchy. They gave her strength, presence, and quiet. But this guard heard something he wasn't supposed to. He heard Camilla organizing a coup behind a locked door in a quiet hallway. She wasn't going to use soldiers or bloodshed. She was going to use poison, propaganda, and time. He heard her say bad things about the monarch, including that he was weak, an old thing, and a problem that needed to be fixed. He heard her say that it would take weeks or maybe days. He may have told someone about it. He could have put it in the ground, but he stopped it instead. When the king questioned who saved the crown that night, he didn't want to be recognized. He simply returned to his station. Before I tell you how one royal guard risked everything to expose Camilla's worst scheme and what happened when the king found out, make sure you're subscribed and switched on the notification bell. Also, please leave a comment letting us know where in the world you're watching from, because what you're going to see isn't a rumor. There was no drama. It was almost the end of a dynasty that had lasted for 1,000 years. The evening air rushed through Whitehall like something alive, cold and deliberate, pressing on the shoulders of guests as they got out of their cars and into the amber light of Lancaster House. The edifice looked like a jewel box against the evening sky. Its neoclassical columns were lit from within by chandeliers that had seen more history than most countries. At the entrance to the east courtyard, Sergeant Alistair Drummond stood. The white gloves were sharp even though the air was cold, and the scarlet wool of his Coldstream Guard tunic caught the light with every breath. His boots looked like mirrors. His bearskin hat was perfectly level. To every diplomat and minister who passed by, he was exactly what they expected, a living embodiment of formality and tradition. But Alistair had already been to Iraq twice before he got the dress outfit. He could tell the difference between a threat and a show, and tonight seemed odd in ways he couldn't put into words. He felt the same stiffness at the base of his brain that he had felt outside Alhambra, 30 seconds before the convoy ahead hit an IED. Lancaster House had hosted bigger receptions before, so the size of the gathering wasn't a big deal. It was the little things that didn't add up. Earlier that afternoon, 2 black vans with no plates and wooden containers, marked solely with a gold fleur-de-lis, had come through the checkpoints without being checked. When Alistair came ahead, a logistics officer motioned him away without looking up. Lady Camilla's private order, not on your list. He had moved back, but the seals on those boxes weren't up to crown standards. And anything that got past royal catering security wasn't following the rules. It was a process that gave people more power. Then there were the people. The kitchen staff changed all the time, but tonight Alistair saw 8 new caterers with badges on their lapels that he didn't recognize. Their accents didn't fit the standard range either. One sounded like Create, and another like Northern Italian. It could be nothing, or it could be everything. But what disturbed him the most was the chain of command. Clarence's house, Camilla's office, and the king had given every detail of tonight's event, from seating charts to security overrides to guard assignments. It was not Buckingham Palace or MOD liaison that had done this, not somewhere else. Word spread through the ranks that he would be late, something about getting ready for a speech later this week. They said it was fatigue, or getting older. Alistair saw another unmarked package being carried past him into the service entrance. No questions, no dogs, no manifest. People who aren't on the list have too much access. And none of it, the wine, the murmurs, or the movement behind the silk curtains, had the king's power, just hers. The hallways under Lancaster House were like capillaries running through the building's bones, tiny, dark, and ignored by everyone upstairs who were drinking champagne under ceilings covered in gold leaf. The air smelled like furniture polish and old velvet down here, between the private cloakrooms and the exit to the east courtyard. People talked in low whispers that never quite reached the ballroom above. Sergeant Alistair Drummond was in charge of patrolling the east wing. He was there for ceremonial reasons, not tactical ones, and he didn't have a rifle drawn or expect any trouble. He was supposed to stay still, nod at diplomats who passed by, and maybe even lead a lost cabinet minister back to the music. But guards weren't just for show, not the actual ones, not someone like Alistair, whose instincts were still in sync with the beat of convoys and the weight of threats that never came out. He rounded the corner beyond the library alcove and halted. One of the original service doors was split open by an inch or two. The staff usually uses the white panel with the brass handle and frosted window to reset tables between courses. But the last service run was over an hour ago. No one should be in there, and voices came from inside. As Alistair got closer, his boots stopped making noise on the marble. One hand moved reflexively toward his sidearm, not to draw it but to ground himself. He twisted his body so that he could hear without leaning on the door like a palace gossip. At first there were only whispers, but then a voice that made his spine straighten. "Camilla, he won't make it through another winter if we do this right." Her voice was cold, no doubt, just accuracy. The voice of someone who isn't talking but giving commands. A man said, older, clipped, maybe one of her senior aides. How much? Enough to make him weaker, but not enough to find him. He is already worn out. People will believe it's stress, old age, or finally getting sentimental. Alistair's breath stopped. Camilla, who was quieter now, but every word struck through. "We keep the doctors busy with important people, and then we quietly step down. I'll take care of the press angle, modernization, efficiency, and all the other terms they adore." "And the guard?" the man asked. She laughed, cold and controlled, like shattered glass wrapped in silk. "These are props. Circus performers wore fur hats. Some of them don't even have live rounds anymore. I want them to go away completely. We'll have a token at the entrance for pictures. The others are sent to a different place where they can be useful." Alistair's jaw locked up. "He's too soft," she said again. "Still thinks the monarchy is a fairy tale and a legacy. But the world has moved on. We'll help his body decide for him if he won't give it to us. A break." Then the last sentence, low and clear, one heart broken, one retirement announcement, and the crown is mine to shape. Footsteps, the sound of costly fabric moving. Putting down a phone, Alistair cautiously backed away, holding his breath until he got to the end of the hall. His heart raced in his ears, but his face never changed. Years of training kept his face blank, even if his mind was racing. He couldn't talk yet, not without proof, but he had just heard about a coup, not from a distant country or a hostile power, but from the Queen Consort herself, and she was already on her way. Alistair did not go back to where he was supposed to be. He instead moved slowly and carefully along the secondary hallway toward the staff annex, stopping only when he reached a marble bust of George IV. He reached under his sleeve cuff and pressed twice on the watch clasp stitched into his glove in the dead zone between surveillance cameras. A weak green flash. Passive recording is on. Not something that the Royal Guard usually gets, but certain guards, especially those who had worked in intelligence before, had audio redundancy tech for critical areas. The protocol was quiet and almost like a ceremony. No alarm, no active communication. Data is stored locally with a timestamp until it is retrieved. Alistair straightened up and continued on his way, standing tall and with a visage that was as unreadable as stone. He wasn't sure who he could trust. If Camilla had planned this and her aides were involved, going via normal channels might just make the evidence disappear faster than he could find it. It could also make her think that someone had heard. She would speed up and change her plans. He walked past two kitchen workers who were carrying a silver dessert plate. They nodded because they were used to it. He hardly saw them. He was weighing his options and taking risks in his head. He'd seen actual coups in Basra before, not the sort on TV with tanks and speeches, but the silent kind when people disappeared and power changed hands without any explanation. Charles didn't need a body double or an automobile that was bulletproof. He needed food that hadn't been messed with. As Alistair walked back into the lower north hall, his boots clicked quietly on the mosaic tile. He could see the ballroom through the open French doors. It was packed of ministers and aristocrats, all of whom were sparkling. Camilla, sitting under a chandelier that had once lit Napoleon's talks on his exile, looked like a queen, majestic, confident, and untouchable. A footman walked by with a shiny wine caddy. Alistair kept an eye on the label. Chateau Margaux 2005. This is a rare vintage that is normally only used at state events. The bottle didn't catch his eye though. It was the little velvet purse that was clipped next to it. Cylindrical and private. He followed at a distance, remembering the footman's way to the Sleer prep room next to the cellar steps, which wasn't extensively guarded and didn't have cameras. He would look at it again later. For now, he had to act like he was part of the evening's machinery without actually moving through it. He crossed the ballroom door again and started walking around the outside again. People talked in groups as they moved around. A Commonwealth diplomat laughed too loudly somewhere in the room. In the corner, a string quartet played Vivaldi. Everything looked normal, but Alistair had just heard one of the most powerful women in Britain plan the slow-motion elimination of a reigning monarch, not with murder, but with patience, with disease disguised as age. And if he couldn't discover hard proof, like something more than whispers behind a half-open door, the king's body would be the proof. The Royal Culinary Annex behind Lancaster House had shiny counters and copper pans. The crew moved with the kind of trained speed that made it look like there was a plan. Alistair's mind was on something other than food. even if the air smelled like rosemary and thick juice. He had quietly followed the footman for just long enough to see that the wine caddy had gone into the Sleer prep room. Now, dressed in full uniform and as serene as usual, he walked past the arched entrance and into the staging hallway, where imported wines were poured before they were served. There was a container, chest high, at the other end of the room. 2 aides in gray waistcoats with no catering insignia stood next to it, and CM, Camilla's monogram, was stamped into the wood in gold foil right below a stylized crest. Sometimes senior royals send personal shipments to functions, but this one hadn't gone through MOD security. There were no dogs, no clearance tags, and no paperwork, just calm authority, the type that didn't need to beg for permission. Leicester moved onward. Has this one been logged yet? One aide looked up, his face tense. Private reserve. Not for everyone to utilize. Protocols are still protocols, Leicester stated in a calm voice. Need to look inside. The other man's answer was quick and well rehearsed. Orders from the Queen's wife. Guardsman, it's not your business. Leicester didn't say anything. Just put the words "not your concern" away. And then they went on. That's what they always said right before things fell apart. Later, while walking the silver service hallway that connected the staging kitchens to the East Boreham door, he heard low, secretive laughter. 2 assistants were bent over a steel prep table, talking softly over a half-full wine decanter. One person held a little vial, and the other person tilted the container. Leicester stopped moving in the shadow of a stone column. The wine drank the vial like ink dissolving in water. No show, no drama. A gradual black curl that sank into red. The aide spun the decanter once, cleaned the rim, and sealed it with gold foil. Leicester had to fight with everything he had to stay still. Instead, he remembered things like the pattern on the waistcoat, the color of the cufflink, and the faded tattoo that was only barely visible under a rolled-up sleeve. The face was new to me. It wasn't in Palace Archives or MOD, one of Camilla's outside hires, and he had just poisoned the king's wine right in front of him. Finally, Leicester stepped forward slowly but surely. Please hand that over so I can check it. The man got tense. Excuse me. You heard me. A pause, then a smile. Queen Consort's orders. You are out of line. Leicester's jaw moved. So what's in that bottle? But he didn't get worse. Not yet. Not without help. Not without some power. He let the man go, keeping track of everything he did in his head, like a report being written in real time. It was evident now that Camilla wasn't just making plans. She was already doing it. There wasn't enough noise in the hallway outside the Queen's preparation suite for an occasion this big. Leicester could hear cloth rustling, and the quiet scrape of a chair leg on polished wood through the frosted glass doors. No helpers, no talking, only her. He knocked once. No answer. He still opened the door. Camilla stood alone in the middle of the room, wearing rich emerald silk. 3 full-length mirrors around the dressing area made her reflection look like 3 people. She moved a diamond thistle brooch at her collar with her gloved fingers. Royal, exact, perfect. She didn't move when she saw him, did not question why a royal guard came in without being asked. She just raised an eyebrow. She said, "Sergeant Drummond," like she was welcoming a footman. "Someone else must be due for your love." Leicester shut the door behind him. "I just got back from silver service." Camilla turned a little, but her hands stayed at her collar, and saw one of your aides add something to the wine of His Majesty. Something that wasn't from the vineyard. She smiled just a little bit. "You must be wrong." "I'm not," he responded with no emotion. "I was 10 feet away." Neither of them moved for a second. Then Camilla turned to look at him straight on, and her voice got quieter and more controlled. "Do you know how many times the king has passed out this month? How many talks he's put off? How many accords have we put off because he wants handwritten notes and moral reasons?" Leicester remarked. "That's not your job to fix." Her eyes lit up. "Isn't it?" She moved forward, her heels silent on the carpet. "Sergeant, you're an old relic, dressed up in tradition like a wax figure at the tower. Every morning you stand there like a doll in red wool while the world changes around you." He didn't say anything. Allow her to talk. He wants to keep acting like we're still in the time of pageantry and loyalty to the Commonwealth. That fairy tales and uniforms are important, but I know better. I've lived in the modern world, and it's killing us. So your answer is poison. Leicester's voice stayed cold. She stepped closer and continued. "My solution is a monarchy that changes before it dies," choking on lace and sentiment. Her voice got even lower. "Sergeant, I'm not trying to kill him. I'm pushing him to take a break and retire. He won't be hurt. He'll just be softer. And when the time comes to tell the public about the change, they will appreciate us for being quick." Leicester's fingers moved toward his belt, where his ceremonial sword hung heavily. He didn't pull it out. "Not yet," he answered. "You call it efficiency. I call it betrayal." Camilla's face became as hard as marble. "You say you're a soldier, but you stand watch at a door. You protect symbols. I'm trying to keep something real safe. You're not protecting the monarchy," Alistair replied in a low voice. "You're taking it over." Her voice got sharper. "Watch what you say next." Alistair responded, "No, you be careful, because you're not the only one who's been listening." Camilla's stance changed little, but he noticed. Not fear, disdain. That was more dangerous than any weapon in the room. As waiters walked by columns with silver trays, the ballroom was filled with subtle music and sharper chatter. There was a lot of noise under the gold cornices, with the sound of silk rustling and ministers laughing softly. King Charles sat down at the end, under a royal flag that hung between two marble columns. He moved with obvious difficulty, slower than normal, and he looked slimmer than guests remembered him from a month ago. His skin has gotten lighter since spring. People who were paying close attention saw that his hand shook a little while he fixed his cufflink. Camilla sat down next to him, her face calm and her lips turned up in a small smile. She leaned very close to him and murmured something that made him smile. Sergeant Alistair Drummond stood still and inscrutable at the edge of the room. He hadn't pulled out his gun. He didn't have to. The service of wine began. 2 staff members brought out the crystal decanter cart. One of them was the same man Alistair had seen in the hallway earlier, the one who had emptied the vial. His waistcoat was changed now, but his face and gait were the same. He walked with confidence, like someone whose hands had never been questioned. Charles was given the wine right in front of him, in a crystal cup that had been polished with a clean towel. The decanter opened, softly and almost reverently. Alistair moved forward by 1 step, then 2. Alistair had already traveled half the floor by the time the man reached for the goblet. He didn't yell, didn't ask for help. He just put a gloved palm over the stem of the king's glass. He said gently, "I need to look at that." The whole table froze, and every fork was stuck in midair. The musicians even messed up. Camilla turned slowly, and her eyes became small points. "Sergeant," she remarked with deliberate composure, "I think you're mixing up your duties with the rules of the palace. You are not in charge of checking the food." Alistair didn't move. "I saw this bottle get an unauthorized addition half an hour ago. It's being poured for the king. I'm using Section 5 of the Guard Ordinance. Gives me the power to stop consumables if I see signs of tampering." Camilla's voice got colder. "You're making the crown look bad." Alistair didn't say anything. Instead, he moved back, picked up the goblet, and went for the ceremonial pouring chalice nearby, which is a decorative cup used at state events. He slowly poured the contents of the decanter into it. As the wine was pushed beneath the ballroom lights, a subtle shimmer appeared. It wasn't easy to see at first, but trained eyes could see it right away. A cloud that is thin, greasy, and takes a long time to go away. Like electricity, a wave moved through the room. Charles stared at the chalice, and then at Alistair. There was no talking. The music had stopped completely, and in the quiet that followed, everyone there knew that something had been added to the wine, something that isn't meant to be a toast. No one breathed for a moment. Camilla's gaze went from the wine to Alistair, and her face was so keen it might cut. The hall had become something more than just uneasy. This wasn't breaking the rules. It was darker and more basic. There were murmurs among the guests. "What's in the wine? Did he mention poison?" Charles stayed still. Even though he was tired, his eyes were alert as they moved between his wife and the guard in front of him. "Camilla," he continued softly, "do you know anything about this?" She sat up straight, looking like a queen and not moving. "Of course not." But her voice didn't sound angry. It was put together, too calm. Alistair didn't glance at her. He glanced at Charles. "With all due respect, Your Majesty, I have reason to believe that someone messed with the decanter on its route to your table. Earlier evening, I stopped the man who was in charge. He doesn't work for royal catering. He's not even cleared on staff records." Camilla's voice broke through the air. "That's enough." She stood up. Her voice changed. It wasn't shocked, but it was electrifying, like someone who had been waiting for this moment. She addressed everyone in the room. "You all think this is treason? Because one man with a sword and a god complex thinks he's seen something suspicious." She took a slow step forward, hands clenched at her waist, and her voice got louder with each word. "King Charles has served the kingdom with kindness, tradition, and emotion, and see where it's gone. Stagnation, less support from the Commonwealth, weak diplomacy, and bad reform." No one spoke up. She looked at the important people who had come. "I've kept this monarchy alive while he digs it up in memories." She sounded like she was giving a speech when she said, "He clings to pageantry and parades, but I've been getting us ready for what's coming. The world doesn't wait for lace and loyalty. It doesn't give in to silence and duty. It needs strength and the ability to change." Then she looked squarely at Alistair. "Do you think I'd kill him?" she said. "Take a chance on everything to get rid of him? I'd save him from the shame of being remembered as the king who couldn't keep his crown aloft. And the poison?" Alistair asked, his voice steady as a rock. She didn't say anything. Instead, she looked back at Charles. "You won't make it through another year, Charles. You already know it. The tiredness, the medicine, the whispers behind your back. You want to die in the sash and shake hands with kids at school, but I want to save the monarchy before it falls apart with you." Alistair moved forward again. "So you'd kill a king to get it?" Camilla didn't move. She said, "I'd save the monarchy, whatever it takes." Gasping, chairs moving. Again there is silence, last and loud. Everyone looked at the king and waited. There was no more speculation or whispering behind closed doors. Camilla hadn't just hinted at a coup. She'd said it into the air of the crown. King Charles got up from his chair slowly, which made the quiet feel even worse. His fingertips briefly touched the edge of the table, not to keep his balance, but to show that he was determined. As he stood up straight, the gold trim on his cuff shone in the light of the chandelier, and for the first time that night, Lancaster House seemed to know who he was. Camilla looked at him with a short breath. The stiffness in her jaw flickered. She wasn't scared. She was ready to make her case again, but this time with softer words. She didn't get to do it. Charles spoke softly, slowly, and clearly enough to cut through every whisper that was still in the air. He said, "I loved you. Nor furious, nor cold, just the facts. I loved you because you made me laugh when things were hard. I trusted you because you said you believed in what I was attempting to protect, not for myself, but for the institution." He looked at the spilled wine for a second, then back at her. "And tonight, in front of all the diplomats and envoys in this room, you told them the truth. You didn't see me as a partner, but as a problem." Camilla opened her mouth, but Charles raised one hand, like a king, to take back his voice. "I've lived long enough to know what ambition is, but ambition that hurts its own home is not strength. It's rotten." The room was as quiet as a rock. He looked over at the MOD liaison who was standing at the ballroom doors. Charles declared, effective immediately. Lady Camilla must leave Lancaster House and go to Highgrove, where she would be kept under exclusive royal restraint. She is not allowed to give orders. She should not get in touch with workers. There will be no more communication from Clarence House until a comprehensive review is done. Without thinking, palace aides moved. 2 officers in charge of protecting the royal family stepped out from behind columns that were in the dark. Camilla's eyes moved from them to Charles and back again. "You're making a mistake," she continued, her voice lowering to a tone that was almost sad. "You're weak. You've always been weak." Charles didn't say anything. He looked at the room instead. "Let this be clear. People who go against the crown, even from within, are not safe." One by one, her attendants took her personal items, such her phone, access badge, and press pass. There was not a single flash of a camera. The photographers knew what they were seeing. This wasn't a ceremony that looked like banishment. It was a curation by the same institution she had tried to take over. Alistair stayed where he was, standing still and silent. He only moved when Charles looked at him. The king nodded once, slowly and carefully. He replied softly, "You reminded this room what it means to serve, not just to wear the uniform, but to honor it." And with that, Camilla, the former queen consort, was led through the same doors she had come through just a few hours before. There was no applause, no ceremony, just stillness. The private antechamber behind the east wing of Lancaster House was very different from the fancy ballroom. There are no lights or plush chairs here, only polished wood, antique oil paintings, and a silence that feels sacred. Sergeant Alistair Drummond stood at attention by the fire, his rifle on his shoulder and his bearskin hat off, cradled in one gloved hand. The fire crackled softly, giving off little heat, but enough light to make long shadows on the parquet floors. King Charles came in softly, with only one attendant to help him. The man stopped just short of the door and left without saying anything. The king went slowly, and his shoulders were getting tired, but there was something else behind his eyes. Determination, calmness, like a man who had been through more than just one night. He sat down across from Alistair without making a big deal out of it. Neither of them said anything for a few seconds. Then Charles looked up. His voice was quieter now, but it was still strong. "Sergeant, you've had a long night. Alistair didn't change his stance. Your Majesty, I've had worse. The king's mouth turned up slightly at the corners. Yes, I think you have. He let that hang in the air for a while before moving on. I used to wonder if ceremony and stillness made us strong or just made us blind when I was younger. I was reminded tonight that silence may be a warning, and that the quietest person in the room often sees the most. Alistair bowed his head a little. I just did what I had to do, sir. Charles answered. No, you did more. You were the one who kept the crown from falling apart. You didn't ask for permission. You didn't inquire if it would be a problem. You did it. He leaned back in the chair and stared off into space. It's strange. Betrayal from within. It doesn't sound like thunder. Doesn't come in a tank. It walks with you for years, calling itself loyalty, and then one day it decides you're the problem. Alistair didn't say anything. Didn't have to. Charles went on, almost to himself. I've seen this monarchy through scandal and fire, through the death of my mother and the rise of nations that no longer look to us for anything but tradition. But I never dreamed I would have to kick my own wife out of the country for treason. He stopped for a moment and stared Alistair in the eye. You reminded me tonight that our titles don't keep us alive. We live because there are people who won't look away. Alistair didn't move or change shape, but when he spoke it was quiet. Sir, my duty is to the crown, will always remain. Charles nodded once and then stood up. Once more the door opened. The assistant came again, this time with a sealed folio that had the royal seal on it. There were no more spoken instructions. Only the past moved in the air. As the king exited the room, Alistair stayed where he was, alone, uncelebrated, and completely fine with that. London went on with its life outside, not knowing how close the monarchy had come to disappearing from within its own walls. If something seems incorrect, should a royal guard be able to step in against royalty? Should King Charles have quietly removed Camilla? Or should the world have seen her fall from grace? And if you learned of a plan like this in the halls of power, would you sacrifice everything to stop it? Please tell us what you would have done. We read each and every remark. If you think that some uniforms mean more than just tradition, click the like button. Make sure you have the bell symbol on when you subscribe. Every day, we tell stories like these. Send this video to anyone you know who still thinks royal guards are simply for show. You can now see our other royal guard stories on your screen. And we'll see you tomorrow at the same time and place for another story that will make you think it's not true. Stay sharp till then.